Welcome to How to Succeed During a Pandemic. Hi, I'm Wendy Lalli, your host, and I have such a great show for you today. I can't believe it. I have recruited three of the best musicians in Chicago. They not only play, but they also teach. And I am thrilled about this program because I've been wanting to do it for quite a long time. My own profession, I'm a copywriter. And I happen to be married to a jazz pianist who's also a music teacher. And that was kind of the inspiration for this show. Because one of the things I've become very aware of is the fact that for performers and music teachers and anyone, in fact, involved in the music profession, the world basically came to a screeching halt in March 2020. And yet, the music went on. And what I wanted to explore today was how that happened. And so I've invited some very special guests who I'll now introduce you to. The first is my husband, Doug Lalli. Doug, you want to give everybody a wave?
Wave.
Doug is a pianist, a teacher. He also is a novelist, which you will hear a little bit more about in the course of this discussion. And he's a composer, leads a band, and like I said, a lot of that just came tumbling down in March 2020. And how he regrouped and started up again is really the story of today. The other story we're going to tell is Steve Hashimoto. Steve, you want to give people a wave? Yeah, thank you. Very in keeping with Steve because he is an incredibly talented person. He's not only a jazz bass player, he's also a composer, a teacher, he's a graphic designer, a photographer. I don't think I can name anything you haven't done, Steve. He's a record producer, and he will tell you more about what he does shortly. I'd now like to introduce you to Terri Tennes. Terri is a music teacher, a concert pianist, and also plays for a choral group at a Jewish synagogue, and does that every month. I'm sorry. She teaches classical piano. So we have two jazz players and teachers and a classical piano teacher. Do you also teach jazz, Terri?
Only very basic level jazz styles.
So as you can see, it's a very talented, very musical group. And that's what we'll be talking about today. What I'd like each of you to do is just to take a few minutes to talk about yourself, and then we'll go on to a discussion of what happened when COVID came in. Doug, why don't we start off with you? Just tell people a little bit about how you got started playing and what you like to play, and describe your career a little bit.
Okay. Well, I started playing saxophone when I was in the fourth grade. My teachers were not any good, which I didn't realize at the time, but I eventually realized they weren't any good. When I was, I believe, late seventh grade, the band director set me down with a friend of mine who also played saxophone and showed us some chords on the piano, and I was just fascinated. And I went home and I said to my father, "I want a piano." And he said, "Yeah, right." And eventually he got me an M&E toy organ, which had push buttons. So I was playing around on that. And eventually, after a couple of weeks, I realized I didn't need to press the buttons to play the chords. So I was playing with both hands. And I got a real piano when I was about 14. And I had a good jazz teacher for not too long, a guy named Vince Benedetti, who went to Europe and had a pretty successful career, and I think still has a successful career in Europe. And he showed me some basic stuff. But basically, I'm self-taught as far as that's concerned. Is there more you want me to say?
Well,
what happened then?
We can get on to the rest of your career in a little bit. Let's give Steve a chance.
Okay, well, my story has some similarities to Doug's. I actually started off as a drummer, and my dad bought me a snare drum, and within days decided, oh, that was a mistake. Uh, and then he was also a company bugler in World War II. And so I started taking bugle lessons at my grammar school. I used to wake up early and call reveille for the school. And then I got a trumpet, and I took trumpet lessons from a private teacher in grammar school. And I also had one of those Emily button organs like Doug did. But I never got to the point where I learned how to play chords. I used to just play the buttons. But I learned how to read music as a trumpet player, which has sometimes come in handy. And so I played my first professional gig as a trumpet player in a soul band in about 1968, and played with that band for 3 years until I blew my chops out because we didn't have adequate sound reinforcement. And so I was just blowing loud every night and not playing correctly. And so I switched over to guitar just because, and it was also the hippie era and everybody played guitar. And so I started playing guitar, but I still didn't know any chords. I could play solos, I could play single note lines because I was a trumpet player, but it was many years until I learned how to play chords. And then in about 1979, I got called to sub on a jazz band led by Jack Hubble as a bass player. And I told him I don't play bass. And he said, I've got a bass, I've got a Fender you can borrow. Because back in those days, every electric bass was called a Fender. And it wasn't a Fender, but it was an electric bass. And he said, why don't you come over to my house and we'll see if it works out. And evidently it did, because he hired me for the gig. And as soon as I started playing the bass, I felt like I had found the instrument that was my voice. And so pretty much I've been a bass player since then. But I still play guitar. I'm actually playing guitar next weekend in a band. And I learned enough about piano to compose, enough about theory. But again, like Doug, I'm primarily self-taught. Aside from being taught how to read music, everything else I know is been pounded into me at gigs. And that's about it.
I want to say that for those of you who don't know Steve, he is regarded as one of the best jazz bass players in the city.
Nah.
You had a good teacher. Terry, how about you?
Well, I grew up in a very musical family. My dad and my mother used to sing us duets when we would go to sleep at night. And they sang in the church choir, and my dad would often get solos to sing at church. And whenever he would join a community choir, if they were doing something that had a solo part, he would often get that. But none of them did this professionally at all. So I learned to sing duets with my sister when I was in kindergarten. And we would sing on family vacations, and we had this old broken down piano in our basement that I banged away at and learned heart and soul from my friends and chopsticks and things like that. And I had to wait till I was 7 years old to get formal lessons because the teacher in our neighborhood didn't want to take anybody below the age of 7. So I studied with her through grade school, and then at some point I think we had some kind of falling out, and then I went with another teacher, and it was kind of spotty education with teachers from then until I finally found the right teacher in college. And I wasn't sure that I would ever do this for a living, but I just had this passion for music. And I also took up viola when I was in the 5th grade, so I could play with an orchestra, and did that all through school. And I also took up guitar at some point and was completely self-taught. I just taught myself by using the little dots and finger numbers on sheet music that I found. I just always loved making music.
Yeah.
Doug, you want to tell a little bit about your experience during this time?
Well, I lost a lot of students because they just didn't want to do remote lessons. And my understanding is that there's technology, where you can do a lot more things than I do. But I may be wrong about this. My understanding is that both the teacher and the student have to have the same equipment for it to work. I don't know if that's true or not. It doesn't matter because I couldn't afford it anyway. But so I lost a good deal of students, but the students that remain, for the younger students or the students who are just pretty much starting, I do it on Zoom because it's very important for me to see their hands on the keyboard. Terri would know that, for a lot of reasons. It's important. And I do some over the phone, which is ridiculous, really, except, these are students that are more advanced. And I had one who after a few lessons decided this is not working. He was an excellent player, but, it really distorts the sound in ways like, not to get too technical, but in other words, if someone's playing legato, you can't really tell because it's over the phone and it gets distorted. So you have to say, "Are you playing legato?" And they say, "Yeah." And so you have to trust them. And things like fingering for scales, are you sliding your thumb under there? And you have to trust them that they're doing it the right way. So it's obviously, it's just not, Zoom is a better way to teach than over the phone, but neither one is a good way to teach or be taught.
When we were exploring, because I was trying to help Doug discover solutions, what I found out, and I showed this to him too, that there are people that actually have been doing this for years. They've been teaching through Zoom or programs like that, and they're basically people that are teaching students in other countries. Or students that are on tour, they're professionals teaching other professionals, really. But they basically have television studios in their studio. It's not a small deal. They have special equipment to be able to do this. So, I wonder in the future if that's going to be part of someone like you, Terri, like part of your equipment is going to be a television camera and the microphone and all of those things is kind of normal. You really sort of wonder.
Yeah, I wonder that too. When I first started out with this, I have a nice desktop here, but I don't have iPad or laptop or anything like that. So I didn't have anything that was in my computer that would give me this visual. Yeah. So first of all, I borrowed a very, very old iPad from somebody, and it's so old and cheap, so it doesn't focus, it doesn't refocus as you move. So I would find as I'd show a student something like this, you just get a blur, So I did have to buy a new webcam, and this is my new webcam, and now I can move and you don't see this crazy blur.
Yeah, it looks great. How do you see the future or your future?
Well, I'm not optimistic at all. Things are definitely getting better. I'm in what we call a jobbing band, a wedding band. And typically, it's been getting worse every year, but typically we would play 35 to 40 to 45 weddings a year. And in terms of income, what I make on one wedding gig is equal to 3 or 4 or 10 jazz gigs. And so losing all of those gigs last year, we played 2 weddings. We've already played 2 weddings this year. We have about 10 or 11 left booked. And who knows if any of those are actually going to happen. But that's 15 weddings a year is not enough to make a living. Um, Terri probably knows this. I was playing a lot at the Oak Park Arms for Desi Vasquez. She was hiring me to come and rehearse with the choir and playing 1 or 2 performances a month there. And of course, because it's a senior residence, they closed down immediately. They closed down even before St. Patrick's Day. And that's been a pretty significant loss of income for me. All of my steady nightclub gigs, every single one of them ended, and have only one of them has resumed since then. I used to play at the Green Mill every Friday night, and I've done that since 1987. And I'm hoping that's going to come back, but it can't now because my gig started at 1:30 in the morning, and the place can only stay open until midnight. So until they get their 4 o'clock license back, that gig is not going to happen.
But I think that whether you recognize it or not, that all of you have kind of developed an alternative to work on. I mean, I know with Doug, it seems to me that the alternative really has been concentrating on his own music, which composing it and playing it, and also what he's been doing in these Facebook Live concerts is really turning it into sort of a symposium on the music for musicians, which I think is very interesting. Even though I don't understand half of it, I find it it's interesting to listen to and to try and understand what a musician is doing with the music versus just playing it. And hopefully other musicians will find it interesting too. And Terri, you obviously, I mean, I see you as kind of set for life. I mean, you're sort of like the new wave piano teacher. Steve, I can't imagine you not being successful at everything because you have so many talents that you can take advantage of during this time. I realize that the wedding thing must be, it's an incredible loss. And I don't, when you look at that, it's not only musicians, but the people that host the parties, all of those people that depend on the wedding industry. I mean, I don't know. Our whole concept, I think, of big events like that has undergone a serious change. And whether or not that will ever come back in our lives, who knows? What advice would you guys give to someone who wants to make a career out of music themselves? Don't do it, I know, but aside from that, Doug, how about you? Why don't we start off with you?
Well, the first thing I would say is, unless you're passionate about it and you know you're really talented, then I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but you need to do something. You need to have a day job. And we all know Sam Robinson, great trumpet player, who's a tenured French teacher at Lyons Township High School. I hope he never gives up that job, and decides he's going to tour the world. He's a good enough player to do that, but I hope he doesn't do that, because not just the fact that we're in a pandemic, but the music business has always been hit or miss. A couple of years ago, our son, Jeff, bought me a biography of Thelonious Monk. very interesting. Monk, even though he had won critics awards, international critics awards, and all these awards, being the best jazz piano player of the year in downbeat or whatever, couldn't get work. It was amazing. And somebody like Cecil Taylor, though admittedly his playing was a little bit out there, would dress up in a tuxedo in his apartment, sit down at his apparently grand piano and do a concert to nobody. So the music scene is, the advice I would give people, as I said, is that, this, you have to be passionate, you have to be talented, you have to not just have people tell you you're talented, you have to know that you're talented, regardless of what age that finally sinks in.
It's the same advice our parents gave us.
It is, minus the avoiding the drugs part. But I don't think that's as prevalent as it was back in Monk was around. And it's amazing, these books I'm reading. I'm reading a biography of Chet Baker. It's just like everybody was strung out on heroin. I mean, people who eventually became real estate moguls and everything used to be strung out on heroin. So I don't know if that's happening these days, but speaking specifically about the music part, it has to be something you absolutely need to do.
I think it's true not only in music, it's true for any art form. I mean, if you have to do it. Otherwise, my advice would be don't do it. or do it as a hobby, find a profession. It's just too hard otherwise. There's too many sacrifices that you have to make. If you love it, if it's all you can do because that's who you are, then that's it. That's who you are. Terry, you're shaking your head. Yes, you seem to
Yeah,
agree.
I think that's true. I had a music history teacher in college who used to say to us, you don't have to go into music. If you don't need to do this, find something easy like brain surgery. But it's true. I think you have to have the passion, and I think that you have to find ways of being flexible, because it's not just during the pandemic that you have to be flexible and find ways around certain things. Students come and go, gigs come and go, and most musicians that I know do a handful of different things, and if you can get some kind of steady gig that's like every week, great. But if not, you have to kind of pull things together from various parts of the community.
I just flashed on that old joke about the guy who was cleaning up after the elephants in the circus, and someone said, "Gee, why don't you get a decent job?" And his response was, "What? Quit show business?" So, Steve, how about you?
Occasionally, I get asked to lecture at colleges to music students. Uh, and the first thing that I tell them is that don't go into music with the objective that you're going to get rich and famous. Go into it because you feel like you have to, that you have something that you want to say, that you love it. And if you're lucky, you will at least be able to make a living. And if you're super lucky, you'll get to be rich. But if you expect to be rich, you will almost always be disappointed, and then you will be a miserable person for the rest of your life. But if you're playing music because you love to play music, doesn't matter what kind of horrible gigs that you wind up playing and what kind of horrible audiences you play for, and how little money you make, you'll still be happy because you're playing music. And I guess that's, that's kind of what I feel. If somebody asked me, should I go into music? My question would be, do you really want to? Do you really desire? Is that your heart's desire? Then yeah, do it. But if their answer is, yeah, I want to be a YouTube star, I would say, good luck, buddy. You still got to try it, but come back and talk to me in 5 years and let me check on your progress.
That's wise advice from all of you. Well, we're going to have to close down the shop now because we've coming up to 12:30, but I want to thank all of you very, very much for coming. And this has been a real thrill for me because I've been wanting to do this particular show almost since the beginning, when I was seeing the challenges that Doug was facing, and that everyone actually, all the other musicians I knew were facing as well. So thank you all for being here and sharing your experiences. I just want to tell the audience, please, I hope you'll join us again next week. We are on 216thenet.com every Monday from 12 to 12:30. And we're also, you can see these folks on video on Facebook and YouTube. Just go to Facebook and dial up the Succeed in Pandemic page and you'll see the show. And I hope you'll do that and share it and like it and tell your friends about it. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and also, as I always close every week, until at least for a little while, please stay in for just a little bit longer until everyone's vaccinated, and stay well. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Nice to see all of you.